on the road. So to get it back on the recording now, which I should have done earlier, we're doing group policy, which is perhaps one of the most important aspects of the server, Windows Server operating system. It allows us to centrally configure settings both for our computers as well as our user accounts. It's one thing to have a bunch of centralized user accounts so that you can go to any computer and log in, but it would be a pain for the administrator to have to go into each account and configure settings on a one-by-one basis. Likewise, it would be a pain for the technicians and the administrators to go to each computer and configure settings. Group policy gives us a way to centralize that management by creating our organizational units and linking policies to those units and putting members into those units. It allows us to push out the settings to our user accounts as well as our user and computer accounts. Before we go on, Brittany, are you able to hear any better now?
She said she did in the chat.
Okay, all right, thanks. Okay, so in the example, we're going to look at a situation where we have 3 sites on the West Coast. We have a San Francisco site, we have a Seattle site, and we have a Los Angeles site. And we want to be able to configure the control panel and the recycle bin for the users in those sites. So for example, in general, for everyone on the West Coast, we want to remove their recycle bin. We want to remove their control bin, control panel. We want to show their recycle bin. So like in San Francisco and Seattle, we want to remove their control bin, control panel, and show the recycle bin. But Los Angeles is a little different. You know, those LA folks, they just got to be different. They want to show the control panel, but they want to remove the recycle bin. And we want to do this for all the user accounts that are in these different locations. So what we don't want to have to do is for every user to configure those accounts individually. Group policy gives us a way to centralize all of that. I'm opening up MATLAB now, one moment. I need to end my current reservation before I can make a new one. Hold on. So while this is loading, how has the online experience gone so far for those that are traditionally in face-to-face meetings? All right, no news is good news. Glad to hear that. Okay, Alexandra, glad to see it's good. All right is good. Okay, I'm glad it's working out for you. Yeah, it's definitely something to get used to. In my previous job, I was there for 8.5 years, and there were people that I never saw face to face. We would be on a meeting every morning, but some people would be in India, some people would be in Brussels, some in the UK, some in Brazil, some up in Cincinnati. We never actually saw each other face to face. But every morning we would have that change management meeting, talking about the different changes that are going on and different issues that have come up. And we always did it just like this. We would dial into, um, we would we would either dial over the phone into a conference call, or we would be on a chat like this, looking at different documents. And twice a year, we had to patch like 400 servers in one night. And so we would get on a conference call, and either I or one of my coworkers would manage this huge spreadsheet, tracking which servers need to be patched, when they can be shut down, when the patching has been completed, have they been restarted, have they been tested by us, have they been tested by the client. We would do all this over a 2 night period, from 8 p.m. to 8 a.m., with literally 30, 40 people on the call. And we made it happen. So yeah, this is something you got to get used to, because it's a very important part of the modern IT landscape. And I say the modern IT landscape, but it's also part of business as usual for a lot of different corporations, either for having meetings across multiple sites or for teleworking. I saw somebody say, I'm looking forward to teleworking one day. I got to tell you, it's wonderful being able to work from home. I did that, like I said, for about 8 years. I really liked it, especially if you have small children. It really gave me an opportunity to be involved in karate classes, the t-ball, the basketball, music lessons, art lessons, all that tender year stuff. Okay, so the server is almost booted up. So, and we're going to go into group policy management. That's where we manage all of our group policy objects, as we saw in the previous class. Oh, my transition from work to the classroom. Let me give you a little example. One moment. But in general, it's gone well. I have taught online before, so it wasn't totally new to me. Um, what was different was accounting for the different types of classes. And fortunately, much of our stuff was already online this class, but getting things set up for my hardware class, that took just a little doing. And I also want to have some stuff set up for y'all, so I'm still working on that. And I'm trying to open up a picture, but it's going real slow. I just wanted to show you a picture of what I have set up here. Um, but it was fun getting it set up. I think we're killing my internet connection, so I'll have to show you that later. So here within group policy, we find our domain. In this case, the my domain. When we redo this, I would definitely get them to change the name of that domain. I hate saying the same word twice. The my domain, that really just grates on my nerves. But within here, we have our default policy objects, our group policy objects. So when you turn a server into a domain controller, the server is going to automatically set up a default domain policy and a default domain controllers policy. So this default domain policy, we can see here that it is linked to the domain. This little script sign here with the arrow indicates that this is a link. So under here in group policy objects, this is where we have a list of all of our objects. But you notice the icon here is just a little script sign. It doesn't have an arrow. Here is the actual policy. In order to use the policy, we have to link it to something. That something can be our domain, or that something can be a site, or that something can be an organizational unit. And for the most part, we link it to organizational units. For example, here, domain controllers. By default, it's the only organizational unit that's created when you create your domain controller. So the little yellow folder with the little script sign embedded in it, that lets us know that it's a organizational unit as opposed to just a regular container. So here we can see that the default domain controllers policy has been linked to the domain controllers. So whenever we add a domain controller to our network, that domain controller will go into the domain controller's OU, and that domain controller will receive all of the settings that are present in this policy. So let me show you the settings. So there aren't many, just a couple of settings here for the domain controllers where we set up our local policies and user rights assignments. This basically says who can do what when they log into the server. And then we have security options. So all these settings that are in here, they get applied to all of our domain controllers because this policy has been linked to that OU, and everything that's a part of our domain is going to receive these settings because this policy here has been linked to the domain. So if we have 10 computers or 10 servers or 2,000 or 3 million computers that are a part of our domain, they will all receive these settings at the appropriate time. Any questions or comments? Okay, so again, our goal is to set this up where we have our West Coast OU, and within that OU, we have San Francisco, Seattle, and Los Angeles as sub-OUs. And the things that we want to configure are whether or not we want to show or remove the control panel, or whether we want to show or remove the recycle bin. So the first thing we can do is actually create our OUs. Before I showed you how we can do that in Active Directory or users and computers or in Active Directory Administrative Center. But we can also do that right here. It's right here. We can also do that right here in group policy management, which is kind of convenient. You won't have to jump back and forth for everything. So if we right click on the domain and then do new organizational unit, we can create an OU called West Coast. So we can see here that West Coast is an OU within my domain. Just like domain controllers is an OU within my domain. And within the West Coast, we want to create some sub OUs. So I can right click on West Coast and then click new organizational unit, with those being Los Angeles. And I can also create Seattle and San Francisco. San Francisco. Those were the ones, right? Yep. Seattle, Los Angeles, and San Francisco. Okay. So that just created our OUs. Now we need to create some policies. When it comes to creating policies, you want to make them as granular as possible. What I mean is you want to have as few settings in each OU as possible. That way, whatever settings that you want to apply, you can create an OU for that and apply just those settings. For example, now you don't want to create a policy for each and every setting that's available, because believe me, there are literally thousands of settings that are possible. So what I'm saying is you want to take your settings and group them together in such a way that you account for your different scenarios. Like here in the default domain policy and the domain controllers policy and default domain policy, these are policies that are specific to our domain controllers and our overall domain. If you put too many settings into one policy, it can have an adverse effect on your system operation.
How many is too many?
That depends on the size of your organization, how many domain controllers you have, the speed of your network. So basically, it's a little bit of trial and error. You sometimes set up your system in a test environment and work out all the kinks, and then you deploy it. If you have a really large organization, you'll deploy it to a subset of your organization to get a feeling for how does these configurations affect the performance of the network. Then from there, you expand it to the larger network. And then if you start seeing issues, you might have to go back and tweak your policies so that you're not bogging down your server, and so that you're not bogging down your network because it's having to send so much traffic at one time due to all of your policies.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. And I just lost my server, so let me go get it back. So what we're going to do is make 4 new policy objects. We'll make remove control panel, and show control panel. We're going to do the same thing for the recycle bin. So we've created our policy objects. We've created our OUs. So I'm pausing here because I want to reiterate some stuff that I said last time. Our policies, in order for them to have any effect, there's a lot of stuff that needs to be in place. One of the things that has to be in place is they have to have settings. See, if I click on this policy here and go to settings, there's absolutely nothing there. So it's the settings that determine what the policy does. So for each of these policies, we need to configure some settings. You configure settings with the group policy editor. To do that, you right click on the policy and go to edit. So this is going to open up the group policy management editor. And as I pointed out the last time, within the editor, you're going to have a computer configuration node, and you're going to have a user configuration node. Any settings that you do within computer configuration, those will get applied when the computer is turned on or when you restart the computer. The settings that you do in the user configuration node, those get applied when the user logs on. So these different nodes here have different settings that will get applied at the right time. So the settings that we want to look at right now are for control panel and for recycle bin. And to get to those, well, here's control panel. So I can click on control panel, and I see this setting here to prohibit access to control panel and PC settings. If I double click on that, we get a description of it. So what the description here is saying is, if I enable this setting, I will remove the control panel from the start button, and anything that resides in the control panel will not be available. So the things that are inside the control panel, you can get to them in different ways. So for example, I can right click and go to device manager and open up the device manager. I can also get to the device manager by going into the control panel and going here. So the device manager resides in the control panel. So since it resides in the control panel, if I disable the control panel, I'm not going to be able to get to the device manager from here either. So that's our goal, to turn off all access to the control panel and the things that reside in the control panel. So for each setting, you can leave it not configured, you can enable it, or you can disable it. So the action that takes place upon enabling and disabling, it depends on the wording. So here, this says the purpose of this setting is to disable all control panel programs and PC settings. So that means if I enable this, I am disabling the control panel. If I disable this, I am saying I want to enable the control panel. So you got to pay attention to the wording to know the effect of the enabling and disabling. So here it's like a double negative. If I disable the disable, I'm enabling. You got to pay attention to that wording. Now, this particular setting, well, for this particular policy, this is our remove control panel policy. So we want to enable the setting for this particular policy. So I apply it, click OK. Now I can see that for the remove control panel policy object, this particular setting has been enabled. Now, there are literally, again, thousands of different settings that you can do. Don't let that worry you. Don't let that scare you. You do not need to memorize each and every setting that's in here. Not for this class, not even in real life experience. Oftentimes, when it comes to these settings, there's a best practice, or I call it a recipe or a cookbook, that says, if you want this particular configuration, these are the settings that you need to enable or disable. And so you'll just go through and find those and set them and either enable or disable them as needed. So don't let the multitude of different settings be a concern. Any questions so far? All right. So that was remove control panel. We can do the same thing for remove recycle bin. Well, let's do show control panel first. We're going to go back to that same policy, or we're going to go back to that same setting. But for this particular policy, we want to show the control panel. So we want to disable this particular setting. By disabling the setting, we do the opposite of the description. So the description says this setting is supposed to disable the control panel. So we want to disable this setting. Therefore, we will enable the control panel.
Professor, I think Brittany had a question in the chat.
Yeah, I saw that. Well, what I saw was, can he not see my question? I did not see the original question because I can't see the full chat screen. So, Brittany, what's your question?
Do you want me to read it out for you?
Would it be easier to edit a default policy and attach a second policy? Default policy. For what action? Are we talking about the control panel or for the whole domain? I assume you mean a general default policy that applies to everything in the domain. And that's actually where where is it? Well, let me finish this and then I'll answer your question. So here we're dealing with a specific policy to show the control panel. And we're disabling this setting because we actually want to enable the control panel. And getting to Brittany's question, here we have a default domain policy. And this policy will apply to everything that's within our domain. So you could go through and edit this particular policy. And we could come down here and say that, yes, we want to, in the wrong place there. We want to, by default, turn off the control panel, or by default, enable the control panel. We could put that in our default domain policy. But let's say, and that would apply to every computer by default. But in this case, let's just say we want to set up policies that are specific to the West Coast. So if we set up policies that are specific to the West Coast, we just apply those to the West Coast. If we don't want to apply it to everything, we can apply it just to the ones that we want to do. But if at some point you decide that by default I need to disable the control panel, you could update this policy, and that would apply to everything. And then later on, if you decide that you want to enable the control panel just for the West Coast, you could make a policy to do that. So it just depends on how you want to manage it. That answer your question? All right, you're welcome. Okay. So we took care of the control panel options. Now we do the same thing for the recycle bin. Earlier, we created the recycle bin policies, but we didn't give them any settings. So now we're actually giving them settings. And those settings are here in the desktop under administrative templates. So the purpose of this setting is to remove most occurrences of the recycle bin icon. So if we enable this, we're removing the recycle bin. So now we can see that that setting, remove recycle bin from desktop, we can see that that setting has been enabled. Now we do the same thing for show recycle bin. Only this time we choose to disable this setting because that would be the opposite of removing. So doing the opposite of removing, we say we want to show the recycle bin. Okay, so now we have created our OU structure. We've created the different policies that we may want to apply. So now we need to link the policies to the OUs. To link the policies to the OUs, we click on the OU, then we can click link in existing policy. Now you do have the option to create a policy and link it at the same time. Um, but personally, I prefer to create the policies, create the OUs, and then go back and do the linking. So here I right clicked on the OU and I want to link an existing policy. Which policy do I link? Well, you decide that ahead of time. So in our structure, we want to remove the control panel. We want to show the recycle bin for all of our users on the West Coast. So going back to here, we right click on West Coast. We want to remove the recycle bin. Not the recycle bin, we want to remove the control panel. So now we can see that the remove control panel policy has been linked to the West Coast. And you can link several policies to an OU because we also want to show the recycle bin for all the devices that are on the West Coast. Questions, comments? This linking step is very important because creating the policies and giving them settings does nothing until you actually apply those settings somewhere. So in this case, the only settings that we've applied are the ones that we created anew were remove control panel and show recycle bin, and we've applied those to the West Coast. So let's before we go any further, let's test those settings. So to test those settings, we can go to our Windows 7 computer. And log in as Alice admin. Okay, we have a problem. Alice still has access to both the recycle bin and the control panel. We can see the recycle bin here. We can see that the control panel is still part of her control start button. Whereas we wanted to remove the control panel. Seeing the recycle bin, that's fine because that was part of the plan, but that control panel should have been removed. Can anyone remember what else we have to do when it comes to all of this group policy stuff?
Brittany said, do you need to restart the computer?
I don't believe so, but I'll give it a try. Now, normally, since let me show you this before I go on. Removing the control panel is part of the user configuration node. So those settings are supposed to be applied when the user logs in. So it should not be necessary to restart the computer. Granted, there are some exceptions, but that should not be necessary here, but I'm going to go ahead and try it anyway. Actually, I know this isn't going to work, but I'm going through the troubleshooting process. While it's restarting, I want everyone else to think, why does Alice, why does she still have a control panel? What else do I need to do that Alice will not have a control panel?
Is it because she's admin?
It is not because she's admin. This policy is supposed to apply to all authenticated users. So if you did want to have some exceptions to a policy, you can do that here. Like if you wanted this only to apply to standard users or non-administrators, you could set that up here. Or if you wanted to apply to specific users, you could do that in security filtering. But because this is supposed to apply to all authenticated users, her being an administrator should not have an impact. Other suggestions? There we go. Is Alice in the OU? She is not. And that is the answer to the question. And I wanted you to think about that because this is very important. Um, as I said the last time, a lot of stuff has to be in place. So we have our OU. What OU is this? This is, say, the West Coast OU. And we have a set of policies that we want to apply to that OU. We want no recycle bin. Saying that, yeah, we want no control panel. And we want to show the recycle bin. These are the settings that we are applying to this OU. But we have to remember that the settings get applied to objects within the OU. So in order for this to have any real effect, we need to put Alice admin into the West Coast OU. Let me make sure that's spelled out. She at least needs to be somewhere within the West Coast OU. But Alice actually works in Los Angeles. So, yes, she needs to be in the West Coast OU, but within the West Coast OU, Los Angeles, she needs to be in the Los Angeles OU. Now, I know that we said that LA has the opposite. We're going to work up to that. But first, let's test what happens when we just put her in a LAOU. Let's see if she gets those settings. So our goal is to put Alice in the LAOU. Now for that, we do have to go back to users and computers or into the administrative center. So right now, Alice is in the users container, but we need her to be in the Los Angeles OU. Now she's in the LAOU. Now if we go back to, lost my screen, get it back. Now if we go back to Alice, and log out and log back in again, she should lose her recycle bin. I probably should have done a GP update first because yeah, we just put her in the OU, but the system might not have picked up that change. But we're here now, so let's go ahead and log in. So I'm gonna do a, oh wait a minute, I got that backwards. She was supposed to lose her control panel. I checked the wrong thing, didn't I? Sorry about that. In the West Coast, the recycle bin is supposed to show, which it did, but the control panel was supposed to go away. And sure enough, there's no control panel now. And if I try to what was that example? Okay, so there's an example of something that's in the control panel that she cannot do. Because we restricted access to the control panel, she can no longer manage the network settings. So to reiterate, in order for this to work, the OU must have objects. So the top level OU is the West Coast OU, but within there we have a LA OU. We added Alice to the Los Angeles OU. So the settings that we have linked to that OU, no control panel and show recycle bin, those get applied to the Alice account. If there's no objects, nothing gets applied. Everybody good with that? Okay, let's do this. Let's take a quick break and come back at 12:25, and we'll continue from there. Okay, so we have put Alice in the LAOU. The LAOU is in the West Coast OU. And we've applied the policies, no control panel and show recycle bin. We've applied those to Alice. And sure enough, she does not have a control panel, but she does have a recycle bin. Before I go on, can everyone hear me okay?
Yes.
Perfect. So this is a good time to talk about inheritance. We go back to group policy management. We can see that there are no policies applied directly to Los Angeles. The only policies that were applied to the West Coast. So if I click on West Coast, I can see that, yeah, there were a couple of policies applied. But if I click on Los Angeles, there was nothing applied directly. There was nothing linked directly, I should say. But the policies still got applied. So I want to be sure I say that correctly. We linked policies directly to the West Coast OU, but we didn't link any directly to Los Angeles. But because Alice does not have a control panel, it's obvious that the policies got applied to Los Angeles. That's because policies are inherited. Any OUs that are within the domain are going to receive policies that have been linked to the domain. Any policies that are linked to an OU are going to be pushed down to sub OUs. So to see all the policies that apply to a particular OU, we can click that OU and then click group policy inheritance. So here we can see that the default domain policy is being applied to this OU. We can see that show recycle bin and remove recycle bin. I'm sorry, show recycle bin and remove control panel. We can see that those are being applied to this OU. That's because this OU is inheriting policies from the domain and from the parent OU. So this is a good illustration of how you can apply policies and have them, you can link policies, I should say, and have them be applied throughout your domain or throughout your sub OU, depending on how your OU structure has been designed. We designed ours such that there are settings that we want to apply to all of the West Coast. So we can see that remove control panel and show recycle bin. Yeah, those are being applied to LA. They're also being applied to San Francisco, and they're being applied to Seattle. So we can have hundreds of user accounts at these across these 3 different sites, and they will all receive these policies. Now, it's important to understand the order in which the policies get applied. Excuse me. So, like here, we can see the policy order is remove control panel and show recycle bin. So for policies that are linked directly to the OU, they're going to be applied in this order 1, 2, 3, 4, and later policies are applied. The higher that's how do I say this? In situations where the order matters, if you need to change the order, you can do that here. Now, when it comes to inheritance, notice that the default domain policy is at the bottom. Then we have our policies from the parent OU. Can a sub OU become a parent OU? See that question, Brittany? Yeah, we could create a new organizational unit in here, say Hollywood, and say another one, South Los Angeles. But yeah, you can make sub OUs depending on how your structure needs to look. Does that answer your question? You're welcome. Okay. So when it comes to inheriting policies from up the chain, that goes back to what I was saying yesterday, or rather Tuesday, with the LSDOU. So the precedence is local, then site, then domain, then OU, organizational unit. Something's not right. Oh, yeah, it's right. Something isn't right. User, I was wrong about user. Apologies for that. I'm glad y'all took good notes, but that was a mistake on my part. And I'm having a brain freeze right now. Okay, yes. So, and I think I told you something wrong the other day. There, something's not right. I'm going to have to come back to this because there's something that's not clicking right in my brain. So I'll send out an update on LSDOU because something just isn't clicking right now. Okay, here we go. So it's going to apply the domain, and then it's going to apply you. And if there's something in the OU settings that conflict with the domain settings, then the OU settings are going to take precedence. So when we look at the precedence numbers, the lower the number, the higher the precedence. That's kind of backwards, but these two from the OU, from the West Coast, these two policies are going to take precedence over the domain policy if there are conflicts. Okay, what I was saying is we have this policy here, this my domain, this policy here coming from the domain, the default domain policy. Then we have these two policies that are coming from the West Coast OU. Since these two policies came from the West Coast OU, they're going to take precedence over the domain policy. So the lower the number here in terms of precedence, basically the higher the precedence. These are the ones that will take effect if there are any conflicts. And then likewise, if we apply settings to our sub OU, those settings will take precedence over the parent settings. For example, we said that in Los Angeles, we want to show the control panel and we want to remove the recycle bin. So we want to show the control panel for Los Angeles. We want to show the control panel and we want to remove the recycle bin. How can we make that happen? What will we have to do to set up policies for Los Angeles such that we show the control panel and we remove the recycle bin? Anyone? Anyone? Yes, we will link the policy. Policy will we link? So we're going to link a policy. Anyone can answer. Which policy are we going to link to the control panel?
Show the control panel.
Yeah, there we go. Show control panel. We set up that policy to show control panel. Then likewise, we can link the policy to remove recycle bin. That's because we decided that in Los Angeles, we want to show the control panel, we want to remove the recycle bin. So look what happens now to our, when we click Los Angeles. If we look at the link control, the link group policy objects, we can see that we have directly linked these policies to this OU. And when we look at inheritance, we can see that the lowest precedence is going to be the domain policy. Then the policies that are coming from the West Coast, they'll be applied next. Then the policies coming from Los Angeles, they'll be applied last. So the policies coming directly from the OU, these two policies, they have the highest precedence. So if these policies interfere or conflict with anything from up the chain, these are the ones that take precedence. And we can see that in action. If we update our group policy on Win 7, now we have the control panel back because that's what we wanted to do. And there's something about the recycle bin that's such that we're going to have to log off and log back on in order for that particular policy to take effect. So now we can see that the recycle bin has been removed and the control panel has returned. And that's exactly what we wanted. In Los Angeles, we wanted to remove the recycle bin and show the control panel, which is in direct conflict with the West Coast settings that tell us to remove the control panel and show the recycle bin. So the lower we go down the chain or down the tree, the higher the precedence. Now, sometimes there are situations where you don't want things to be inherited. Like, let's say in Los Angeles, we don't want these settings. We don't want these settings to remove this recycle bin and show, um, sorry, to remove the control panel and show the recycle bin. We don't want those settings. So in that case, you can block inheritance. So if I come here and then do block inheritance, then not only is there nothing linked, we can see that there's nothing linked directly to San Francisco. In addition, um, nothing gets inherited. So in San Francisco, we're not getting the default domain policy, nor are we getting the policies that come from the parent OU. So the blocking of policies from the parents gives us the ability to customize a particular OU if we wanted to. But you might have situations where, yeah, it's okay to block these West Coast settings, but everybody has to have the domain settings. We need to make sure that every system in our organization has a default domain policy. So for that, you can enforce a particular policy. So here, I'm applying this policy at the domain level. And if I want to make sure that everybody has these settings, I can click enforce. Okay, this is awkward. There we go. I had to refresh. So now I can see that Seattle will definitely receive the default domain policies because this policy was linked at a higher level than San Francisco. So even though San Francisco is in general blocking policies, I've enforced this policy. That's linked to the domain. So I want to make sure that this policy goes to every system that's in my domain. Link the policy. What do you mean there?
That was from earlier.
Oh, that was from earlier. Okay. Oh yeah, that was earlier. Thank you. Yes. Okay. Now, when you enforce a policy, that also has an impact on precedence. So if I come back to LA here, remember before the domain policy was at the bottom. But because we came here and enforced that policy, it's now jumped to the top. It has the highest precedence. See, it's been enforced, so it has jumped to the top of the precedence list. So blocking inheritance and enforcing policies, those are two different ways to modify the effect of your policies as they're inherited from higher levels. Any questions, comments?
Not from me.
Okay. There's one more concept that's really important, and that's called loop back processing. It's kind of hard for me to say. So loop back processing. What is loop back processing? So when we talked about the settings here in a particular policy, we pointed out that um, there's the user configuration node and the computer configuration node. And we said that the settings that are part of the user configuration node, those are going to apply to the user regardless of the computer that they log into. So no matter where the user goes, those settings are going to follow the user. Um, for example, we can take the Win8 computer and put it in Seattle. Alice is in the LAOU, but she might go to Seattle and log into a computer there. So let's see what happens when Alice goes to Seattle. Too many windows, too many windows. So just to be safe, I am going to restart this computer. And log in as Alice admin. Okay, so Alice admin back here has a control panel, and she doesn't have a recycle bin. Is that what's supposed to be? She's in Los Angeles. Alice is in the Los Angeles OU, and in the Los Angeles OU, those users are supposed to have a recycle bin. I mean, have a control panel, but they're not supposed to have a recycle bin. So that means the policy followed the user. In the Los Angeles OU, we want to remove the recycle bin, but we want to show the control panel. That's for, but those settings were part of the user configuration. Normally, settings that are part of the user configuration are going to follow the user no matter where they are. So since the Alice account is in Los Angeles, um, she should always have no recycle bin, but she should have a control panel. Before I go on, I want to make sure we're all good with that. That right now, the settings that we have for Los Angeles are following the user. We just logged her into the Windows 8 computer, but in the Windows 8 computer, I'm sorry, the Windows 8 computer is in Seattle. So Alice logged into a computer that's in Seattle, and her settings followed her. That is okay normally, but sometimes, and thanks for the feedback, y'all, about that question. Um, that's good normally, but sometimes you might have a situation where you want settings to apply based on where the computer is. So let's say you have a training room, for example. Let's say Seattle is our training site. And in our training site, there are settings that we want to have in place regardless of who's using the computer. By default, anything that's in the user configuration node is going to follow the user. But we might want to have some policies that take effect based on where the computer is located. So in other words, let's say we want to have these policies definitely apply to Seattle because of the way that we're using the computers in Seattle. We want to make sure that there is no control panel, that the recycle bin is present. So what we need to do on these policies is enable loopback. To do that, you go to Edit, then go to Computer Configuration. And it's right here. We want to do loopback processing. So when we do loopback processing, what we're telling the system to do is I want you to take a look at where the computer is located, and I want you to apply settings based on where the computer is located, as opposed to what the user would as opposed to following the user. So I want to do that with the remove control panel. I also want to do that with show recycle bin. I want to enable loopback processing. So um, normally these settings would be applied based on where the user account is. So the Alice account is in Los Angeles. Therefore, in Los Angeles, we want to remove the recycle bin. We want to show the control panel. But we want to make sure that systems in Seattle, we want to make sure that we remove the control panel and we show the recycle bin, regardless of where the user's account is located. Now, if we go back to the Windows 7 computer, or Windows 8 here. Now, since we did a policy change, I want to do a GP update. And she lost access to the control panel, which is what we wanted, right? And as before, we're going to need to log off. And log back on in order to see the recycle bin. And there we go. So now, because we enabled the loopback processing, it's applying the settings based on where the computer is located instead of where the user is located. When I talk about location, I'm talking about the location within Active Directory. If we look here, we can see the computer that she logged into is in the Seattle office, whereas her account is in the Los Angeles office. Because the settings are in the user configuration node, the settings are supposed to follow the user regardless of where she logs in. But because we enabled loopback processing on those policies and we put the Windows 8 computer into Seattle, these settings were applied according to where the computer is as opposed to where the user is. So we have a lot of different ways to maneuver group policy. What you decide to do requires planning and coordination among your administrative team, your user base, and the overall goals of the organization. It's not a one size fits all. That's why there are so many different options. Questions, comments? Okay. Well, that's all that I have for today. Your homework for lesson 15 and lesson 16, they're due Sunday. Hopefully you've been working on them along the way. If you have any questions or comments about anything, please reach out to me. And remember also that I will be online for office hours. That's Wednesday from 1 p.m. to 2 p.m. And also Tuesday and Thursday from 8:30 to 10:45. I'll be hanging out here on the WebEx. But if you need to reach me and get together with me some other time, let me know, and we'll work out something that's convenient for both of us. And I did record today's session, and I'll send out I'll post an announcement when the recording is available. Questions, comments?
Not from me.
All right, folks. All have a good weekend.
Thank you, Professor.
You're welcome. Bye-bye. Hello, hello. What are you up to, young Mike?